Outside the Red Box, insights into global research equipment distribution. Welcome to the Outside the Red Box podcast, your go-to podcast for insights on growing and scaling life science brands globally. Brought to you by Redbox Direct, we specialize in outsourced sales, distribution, and manufacturing for scientific instruments, with over 20 years of hands-on experience. Let's get started with today's episode.
Picture this scenario for a second. You are standing in the middle of a cavernous, echoing convention center. Fluorescent lights are just, buzzing aggressively overhead.
Oh yeah, that classic trade show lighting.
Right, and you are staring down at a 10 by 10 square of completely empty generic gray carpet. It's trade show day. The main doors open to thousands of attendees in exactly 2 hours, and your booth is nowhere to be found.
Wow. Absolute nightmare.
It is, because somewhere in the chaotic lead up to this event, you completely forgot to follow the organizer's highly specific 40-page shipping guidelines. I mean, we have all felt that cold sweat of sudden logistical panic.
Oh, absolutely. It is a very specific, paralyzing type of dread. The realization that you missed a glaringly obvious detail, and now you are literally paying the price while standing on an empty piece of overpriced real estate, just watching your competitors polish their displays.
Yeah, polishing their pristine booths while you've got nothing. But today's deep dive, however, isn't actually about those obvious catastrophic mistakes. We aren't here to remind you to read the shipping manual or double-check your freight tracking numbers.
Right, that's the basic stuff.
Exactly. Instead, we're looking at something much more insidious. We're exploring the subtle, often invisible differences between just passively existing at a trade show and actively conquering it.
Because the passive approach is really where budgets go to die slowly rather than all at once. The active approach is where the return on investment actually materializes.
So the mission for today is clear. We are going to extract the hidden strategies that maximize your leads and, frankly, prevent you from wasting tens of thousands of dollars. We are pulling all of this from an incredibly insightful guide on trade show participation by Rory Gagan, director at Redbox Direct. It serves as a severe reality check on what we are actually doing when we pack our bags and stand in a booth for 3 days.
It really does. And I think the most fascinating aspect of this source material is how it forces us to rethink the very definition of a successful show.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we have a bad habit of judging trade shows by how busy the aisles looked, or, how many branded pens we handed out, or simply how tired our feet are at the end of the day.
Right, like physical exhaustion equals business success.
Exactly. But this material rigorously examines the true financial mechanisms involved. It strips away all of those comforting illusions about what participation actually costs.
Okay, let's unpack this terrifying math. Because before we can even talk about what to do on the trade show floor, we really need to understand why you should care so much about every single interaction. Let's look at the direct costs first, just the baseline numbers to get your foot in the door.
Let's do it.
So you decide to go to a typical larger industry show. The booth space alone, just the privilege of renting that gray square of carpet we mentioned earlier, is about $5,000.
And that merely buys you the empty space. You are essentially renting air.
Right. Then the real spending begins. You have to rent the tables and chairs. You have to pay the venue's exorbitant union fees just to plug in a lamp and get a standard electrical drop.
Don't forget travel.
Oh, yeah. Add the flights, the hotel rooms booked at surge pricing, the taxis, the $20 convention center sandwiches, and the heavy freight shipping for your displays there and back. The source points out that for a 3-day show with just one single person manning the booth, you are easily looking at a baseline of $10,000.
10 grand. The speed at which those ancillary costs accumulate is staggering.
And nobody wants to stand at a booth alone for 3 days, so you bring a colleague. Budget another $2,000 minimum for their travel, lodging, and meals. So a standard 2-person booth setup is going to run you $12,000 to $14,000.
And that's just the cash out the door.
Even if you pivot your strategy to a smaller, hyper-targeted niche show where the booth space is cheaper and you only send one person, you are still looking at a direct cash outlay of around $6,000.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those direct costs, as painful as they are to look at on a spreadsheet, are only part of the story. This is where we have to introduce indirect costs, or what economists call opportunity costs.
Opportunity costs, yeah.
Every time you say yes to spending time and money on a trade show, you are inherently saying no to something else.
That makes me think of, like, a restaurant turning away a line of paying customers at the door because they are keeping a table reserved for a VIP who might not even show up. You are burning potential revenue just by holding the space.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The most obvious opportunity cost here is your salesperson's time. When they are standing on that show floor or sitting in an airport terminal, they are not at their desk.
They're out of the game, basically.
Right. They are not generating new leads in their established territory. They are not qualifying prospects in their pipeline. And they aren't providing sales support to existing clients who might be ready to upgrade. So, to find the true cost of the show, you must calculate that salesperson's daily payroll and the overhead for the days they are away.
Plus, the days they spend prepping for the show and recovering from the travel hangover.
Exactly.
Now, I have to push back on this a little bit. I can hear sales teams listening to this right now, rolling their eyes and saying, but wait, I have a smartphone. I have my laptop. I can just check my emails and stay totally on top of my day-to-day work from the trade show floor between conversations. I'm not actually losing that office time.
It is a very common defense mechanism. I hear it all the time. But the source text calmly dismantles that excuse. If a salesperson is actually able to keep up with their normal day-to-day office workload while standing at a trade show, one of two things is happening.
Okay, lay it on me.
Either option A, the trade show is completely dead, there is 0 foot traffic, and they shouldn't even be there in the first place because the event is a failure.
Right.
Or option B, they are coasting when they are back at the office, and they should be getting significantly more done during a normal work week if they can replicate their output while standing in a noisy convention hall.
Ouch. That is a sharp dose of reality. I mean, you cannot simultaneously be fully present at a high-value networking event and fully present at your desk. Attempting to do both just means you are doing a mediocre job at both.
Exactly.
So let's bring these two numbers together and run the source's hypothetical math, because this is the real aha moment of the material. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Let's say your direct costs for a show are $12,000.
Okay.
And your indirect costs, so the payroll, the overhead, the lost opportunity back at the office, are $6,000. You have now invested $18,000 in this single event.
18 grand. Keep that $18,000 figure in your mind as we look at the return.
Now, what did you get for that 18 grand? Let's say you worked hard, you stood on your feet for 3 days, and you walked away with 30 strong leads and 30 weak leads. The source suggests a formula where 3 weak leads roughly equal the value of 1 strong lead.
Let's look at why that ratio exists, rather than just accepting the formula blindly.
Sure, why 3 to 1?
Well, a weak lead isn't just someone who might not buy. They are a drain on your resources. They require the same number of follow-up emails, the same CRM data entry time, and the same mental energy from your sales team as a strong lead, but with a fraction of the conversion probability.
So they eat up the same amount of time.
Yes. Statistically, it takes about 3 of those tepid, maybe I'll look at your website interactions, to yield the same revenue potential as one highly qualified prospect who actually has a budget and a timeline.
That makes total sense. You are factoring in the dead ends. So those 30 weak leads translate to 10 strong ones. Add that to your original 30, and you have 40 effective strong leads. $18,000 invested divided by 40 effective leads means you are paying a staggering $450 per lead.
$450 for a single prospect's contact information.
Wait, $450 for a single conversation? I mean, for that kind of money, I could literally fly to a prospect's headquarters, take them out to a Michelin-starred dinner, have a 2-hour uninterrupted conversation, and probably still have money left over for the cab ride home.
You really could. That reaction is exactly the perspective shift this source demands. When you realize that every name, every handshake, and every lazily scanned badge is costing you almost $500, passive participation is suddenly no longer a viable business strategy. You cannot afford to just stand there.
No, you definitely cannot, because that $450 clock is ticking long before you even arrive at the venue.
Yeah.
That price tag means you can't just show up on day one, unpack your boxes, and hope the foot traffic is good. The active participation strategy has to begin weeks before you step foot in the convention center, right back at the office.
The preparation phase is where we see the most distinct separation between amateurs hoping for a lucky break and professionals engineering a return on investment.
The source gives a brilliant piece of advice for this phase. Set up your booth in your office first. Decide exactly what you want to bring and exactly how you want it to look. because we have all walked past the alternative. It's the messy neighborhood garage sale trap.
Oh, the garage sale. I know it well.
Right. A company brings absolutely every single product they manufacture, they throw it all onto a folding table, and they just assume that people will be intrigued enough to stop and ask for quotes.
And the psychology of the attendee explains exactly why that fails. A convention floor is a high-stimulus environment. People are experiencing intense cognitive overload.
For sure, there's a million things to look at.
Right. So when faced with a cluttered table of random, disconnected products, a passerby's brain can't instantly categorize what the company actually focuses on. Processing that visual mess requires mental effort they just aren't willing to expend. So they simply keep walking.
They take the path of least resistance. If the show has a particular focus, you have to curate your booth to match that focus. Leave the unrelated products at home. Make your central value proposition instantly readable to someone walking past your booth at a brisk pace.
Clean and focused.
Exactly. But having a sleek, visually digestible booth isn't enough to guarantee traffic. You have to invite people to see it. Now, you can always buy the official attendee list from the show organizers, usually for a massive premium that ruins your budget.
Buying the list is the easy, expensive way. The text highlights a fantastic, free alternative that relies on a bit of intelligent guerrilla marketing.
I love free. How does it work?
The secret here is a demographic reality. 80 to 90% of attendees at an annual trade show will be the exact same people who attended the year before.
Wait, really? 80 to 90% retention.
Yes, it's incredibly consistent year over year.
That is a massive operational advantage if you know how to use it. But how do you actually get your hands on last year's list if the organizers hide it?
It requires a little digital detective work. You can use the Wayback Machine Internet Archive to look at the events website from 12 months ago, where they often publicize speaker lists or major attending organizations.
That is so smart.
You can search LinkedIn or Twitter for the specific conference hashtag coupled with the previous year's date to see who was posting from the floor. You can even look at who your competitors tagged in their social media photos from the last event. The digital breadcrumbs are always there if you spend an hour looking for them.
So you take that historical data, cross-reference it with the current prospects in your CRM, and you reach out directly. You invite them to your newly curated booth before they even pack their bags. You are essentially pre-booking the return on your $18,000 investment.
By the time the doors open, your schedule should already be populated with guaranteed conversations.
So your booth looks like a sleek, curated experience rather than a chaotic garage sale. You've proactively invited the right people using your digital detective work. Now we transition to the actual execution on the show floor. Because once you are in that 10 by 10 space, your physical behavior dictates whether you ever recoup that money.
Body language and active engagement are the only currencies that matter once the show begins.
Which brings us to the absolute cardinal sin of trade shows. The source passionately points out the worst thing a team can do, sitting in the booth with their backs to the aisle, aggressively tapping away on their laptops.
The laptop trap, it is an absolute epidemic at these events.
It is a massive physical and psychological barrier. It's exactly like walking into a retail store and seeing the only employee staring down at their phone behind the register. You instantly feel like you're imposing on them by asking a question. Sitting behind a laptop at a trade show screams, "I am busy, do not interrupt me."
Which is ironic.
Highly ironic, when in reality, you just paid $450 specifically for the chance to be interrupted.
It usually stems from a defensive posture. When foot traffic inevitably slows down, standing at attention feels awkward. Opening a laptop and answering emails feels productive. But that false sense of productivity actively repels the few valuable prospects who might actually be walking by during those slow periods.
So if we know we shouldn't be hiding behind our screens, how do we actively hunt for leads during those inevitable afternoon slumps when the aisles look like a ghost town?
What's fascinating here is the text provides a deeply resourceful tactic to solve exactly that problem, hacking the poster sessions.
Hacking the poster sessions.
Yeah. At many scientific, technical, or academic trade shows, there are dedicated poster sessions where researchers stand next to visual displays of their work. If you have two people manning your booth, you don't just stand there staring at each other when it's slow. You send one person out to actively research the poster presentations that are relevant to your products.
Okay, I have to pause you there, because my immediate reaction is that this sounds incredibly sleazy.
How so?
Well, if I'm a researcher who has spent 3 years studying a specific cellular process, and a salesperson comes up to my poster pretending to care about my life's work just so they can pitch me a $10,000 centrifuge, I'm going to be insulted. Isn't that predatory?
It becomes predatory if your intent is purely transactional, which is exactly why the execution of this tactic requires genuine curiosity. You aren't going to these posters to deliver a hard pitch. You are going to learn about the challenges these professionals are facing in the field.
So you're asking real questions.
Yes, you ask intelligent questions about their methodology. The nuance is that you are building peer-to-peer relationships based on a shared interest in their subject matter.
Okay, so you approach it as an educational mission, not a hunting expedition.
Precisely. And the secondary benefit is massive. If you find presenters who are already using your equipment or software in their research, you make absolutely sure they know exactly where your booth is located.
Oh, I see. Because they become your decentralized marketing team. As they stand by their posters all day, describing their methodology to hundreds of attendees, and they mention the specific equipment they used, they can point people directly to your booth.
Exactly. It costs you nothing, and it carries the profound weight of an unbiased peer recommendation.
That's brilliant.
It is the most valuable marketing you could possibly generate at the event. But whether you are having these deep conversations out at the poster sessions or back at your own booth, gathering a stack of business cards is woefully insufficient. The source emphasizes that you need to record highly granular details immediately after the interaction.
You mean like taking notes right then and there?
Yes, you need to know how hot the lead actually is. What were the specific reasons for their interest? What was their particular pain point? What current solution are they unhappy with?
Because a business card without context is just a useless piece of cardboard. The context, the specific problem they need solved, is the only thing that turns a printed name into a $450 asset.
That context is what gives that investment a shelf life.
Because that $450 lead effectively expires if you don't act on it. The trade show doesn't magically end when the booth is packed up into crates and shipped back to the warehouse. The real work of converting those expensive leads into actual revenue has only just begun. The art of the follow-up is where the game is won or lost.
The follow-up is really where the theoretical return on investment becomes tangible capital.
And it has to be fast, within 48 hours, and it has to be aggressively personalized. Do not just send a generic PDF pricing sheet attached to a template email that says, "Great meeting you at the show."
Please don't do that.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source gives this highly specific, almost funny example of what a great follow-up message looks like. It says, quote, "I recall you were interested in measuring XXX from neonatal rodents."
The inclusion of neonatal rodents is a perfect illustration of the concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, unless you are in a very specific biological field, you are probably not talking about baby mice. But the underlying strategy remains identical. You drop in a highly specific, idiosyncratic detail from your conversation.
Right.
Think about it for a second. Think about the last 3 business cards you handed out at a networking event. Do you remember a single specific detail about those people's actual business problems? If not, and you were treating them as leads, you just threw away over $1,300. Dropping in that specific detail proves you are actively listening to them, rather than just silently waiting for your turn to deliver a pitch.
We can ground this strategy in fundamental psychology, too. As the text notes, we are fundamentally social animals driven by reciprocity. People naturally tend to reciprocate when they feel they have received genuine quality engagement.
It's just human nature.
Exactly. If you treat a prospect like a generic transaction on a spreadsheet, they will treat your follow-up email like spam and delete it. If you treat them like a human being whose specific, complex problem you actually remember, they feel a subconscious social obligation to respond to you.
Reciprocity is an incredibly powerful lever. But even if your booth was flawless, your poster session networking was genuine, and your neonatal rodent follow-up emails were perfectly personalized, we still have to face the final, unavoidable accounting. We have to know if the show was actually worth doing in the first place.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most crucial step of the entire process, the post-show debrief and the calculation of the lead acquisition rate, or the LAR.
Okay, let's break down this equation because this is where the rubber meets the road.
The LAR is a relatively simple mathematical formula, but its implications are ruthless. It is your total cost per lead divided by the gross margin per sale. So you take that $450 cost per lead we calculated earlier, and you divide it by the actual profit margin of the product you were trying to sell them.
Let's run a concrete example of that so we can see how it dictates strategy. Imagine a company selling high-margin enterprise software. The software generates a profit margin of $5,000 per sale. If your cost per lead is $450, your LAR is 9%.
9%?
Right. You spend 9% of your eventual profit to acquire the customer. That is a fantastic ratio. You should probably book a bigger booth next year.
But compare that to a company selling low-margin hardware.
Exactly. Let's say you are selling an industrial component that only yields a $50 profit margin per unit. If your cost per lead is $450, your LAR is 900%. You're spending 9 times more to find the customer than you will ever make selling them the product. You are literally paying for the privilege of losing money.
That math might feel tedious to a high-energy sales team who just wants to get out there and shake hands, but it is the lifeblood of the business. If that LAR reveals that your acquisition cost massively outweighs your gross margin, the takeaway is brutal. You shouldn't just tweak your booth design for next year. You shouldn't just try a snappier elevator pitch. You should dump the show completely.
You just cut the cord.
You cut it.
The LAR calculation is what gives you the explicit permission, backed by irrefutable data, to stop doing things that are actively harming the company.
It completely removes the emotion from the decision.
So to briefly recap the rather intense journey we've taken today, we started by confronting the shocking fully loaded cost of participation, realizing that every single lead can easily cost $450.
A painful realization.
Truly. We moved from the cognitive overload of messy garage sale tables to highly curated in-office booth rehearsals. We learned how to avoid the physical barrier of the laptop trap and how to genuinely network at poster sessions to create decentralized marketing. And finally, we used the incredible psychological power of neonatal rodents, or whatever your specific detail happens to be, to nail the personalized follow-up before using the LAR metric to calculate whether the show actually survives another year on your calendar.
The overarching theme here is a complete paradigm shift. It is moving from passive attendance to the active, strategic exploitation of the event. And this raises an important question, one that builds directly on this concept of opportunity cost and the LAR metric we just discussed.
Right, listening.
If you ruthlessly applied the mathematical formula of lead acquisition rate and the true, fully loaded financial cost of your time, not just to annual trade shows, but to every single weekly networking event, recurring conference, or routine catch-up meeting currently sitting on your calendar, how many of those calendar invites would you delete right now?
Oh, man, that is a dangerous question to ask, but probably the most valuable one you could possibly ask yourself today. The calendar purge might be swift and merciless. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take that question with you as you look at your schedule this week. Good hunting.